Hey everyone, Brandon here from Truck Safe Consulting. Today I'm going to be answering all of your burning questions about the FMCSA's entry-level driver training or ELDT rule, and boy do you have a lot of them. So stay tuned and be sure to hit that like and subscribe button below to stay up to date on all of our new DOT-related content. All right, so as of the date we're publishing this video, we're about 5 months into the new ELDT requirement, which took effect February 7th of 2022. Now, without a doubt, this rule is a pretty big one, impacting every individual who's now seeking a Class A or Class B CDL or certain endorsements, namely the hazmat, school bus, or passenger endorsement. In a couple of other previous videos, we spent some time walking through the rule, discussing to whom exactly it applies, what type of training is required, who's exempt, etc. If you missed those videos, be sure to go back and watch them. But boy, did you all have some thoughts on ELDT. Our comments were flooded with folks expressing their opinions on the rule, most of which were critical, which frankly isn't that surprising. Some of you even projected your frustration and got some digs in on me, which frankly I find pretty hilarious. But remember, don't shoot the messenger here. Looking at you, Hamza. Personally, I think the underlying purpose of the rule is sound, but I agree it could have been handled in a better way. But here we are. What can we do about it now? That said, we received dozens of legitimate questions about ELDT and how the rule applies in particular circumstances, so I wanted to spend some time addressing those directly in the hopes that the answers may be helpful to others in similar situations. So let's dig into some of your most frequently asked questions. Let's start with a couple of easy ones here. First up, Hester's Workshop is asking or stating, I thought B upgrading to A was exempt. In other words, Hester was under the impression that an individual who is simply upgrading an existing Class B CDL to a Class A in order to operate larger combination vehicles was exempt from the new ELDT requirement. Unfortunately, that's just not the case. Class B to Class A upgrades are very explicitly included within the scope of the rule, so if that's you, you'll need to complete the new training in order to be eligible to complete that upgrade. All right, next up, Homeless Greek, great name, by the way, is asking if the behind-the-wheel portion of the training can be done online or if that has to be done in person. Homeless Greek, I'm sorry to say, but you'll actually have to get behind the wheel in order to complete the behind-the-wheel training, meaning you're going to have to complete that portion of the training in person. On the other hand, the theory portion of the training can be done entirely online, which takes us to a couple of other common questions, like this one from Andy, who's asking if he could do the ELDT training online and get the behind-the-wheel training from whoever he likes. Kind of. The rule says that you have to take the training from a certified training provider, someone who's listed on the FMCSA's training provider registry. So you can take the training from whoever you like, so long as they're listed on that registry. Check it out online at tpr.fmcsa.dot.gov and do some research to find a training provider or providers that will work best for your situation. There are literally hundreds, if not thousands of them on the website that you can sort by location, and you can also take a look at their website. So check that out. Okay, another common question about online training. Tito Montano is asking if he has to take the behind-the-wheel training to get a hazmat or endorsement, or if he can get that with just an online course. It's the latter. The rule says that if you already hold a valid CDL and you just need to add a hazmat endorsement, you only have to take a hazmat-specific theory training, which you can do entirely online. This is because in order to obtain a hazmat endorsement, you only have to pass a written test at the DMV, not a skills test. So if you have a CDL and just need the hazmat endorsement, find an online training provider by searching at tpr.fmcsa.dot.gov, complete that training, and then you'll be good to go. Blue Mutter is asking a related question. He mentions folks who obtain their CLP prior to February 7th being grandfathered in and not having to take ELDT. That's true, so long as the CLP didn't lapse and have to be renewed after that date. He goes on to say, but here in Indiana, I've taken my hazmat endorsement knowledge exam already, got my TSA fingerprints, and can't get my hazmat because they want me to take the class. What gives? Well, that's unfortunate for sure, but the grandfathering is only applicable to the base CDL, not to endorsements. So even though you've already taken some of the steps necessary to get that hazmat endorsement prior to February 7th, you still have to go through that hazmat ELDT course to be eligible to get that endorsement after that date. Coach Waffle's asking, how much does the ELDT cost? Well, that's going to vary pretty wildly from training provider to training provider. The rule doesn't set any kind of standard pricing, so training providers are able to set their own. The best advice I can give you is for you to do some due diligence, look up the training providers online, see what they're charging. Obviously, you're generally going to be paying more if you're looking to take the full Class B or A training than if you were to just take the hazmat theory portion, for example. Somewhat related question here from Realmar Jenkins, who says, sounds like CDL school. He apparently took a 240-hour course from a CDL school to prepare him for the knowledge and the skills test at his DMV, and he's asking, is this not the same thing? Zach is asking a similar question. Do I have to go to a full-on trucking school now? Technically, the answer is no. ELDT is not the same thing as these traditional CDL schools, which have been around for decades and have provided very valuable services. The ELDT rule itself does not require CDL applicants to attend any specific CDL school, nor does it set any minimum number of hours for the required training. Now, certainly the existing CDL schools that are out there will in most cases now be registered as training providers, and so if you take their courses, then you should be eligible to complete your CDL transaction. But that's not to say you have to attend these traditional schools. Again, if you run a simple search on FMCSA's training provider registry, you'll find hundreds, if not thousands, of registered training providers, many of which are not CDL schools. These non-traditional training providers offer a range of training services. Some stick specifically to the ELDT rule, so their courses may be significantly shorter in length than the traditional CDL schools, which generally are providing a much more comprehensive and rounded training on how to safely operate a commercial vehicle. And as I mentioned before, the pricing of these various providers is going to vary based largely on the depth and the length of their respective courses. So again, do your homework, find a provider whose program works for you. All right, Nature Lick is asking if he or she has to do this training to get a Class C CDL. Class C CDLs, if you're not familiar with them, usually allow for the operation of smaller vehicles that are either hauling a placardable quantity of hazmat or 16 or more passengers. In other words, vehicles that don't require the Class A or B CDLs. The answer to the question is no. You're not subject to the ELDT requirement if all you need is a Class C CDL. On the other hand, if you also need a hazmat endorsement to go along with that, then you would be subject to the ELD requirement for that particular endorsement. Next up, Ruthless407 says, my brother drove for many years, got a DWI 3 years ago and lost his CDL. He's now trying to get that CDL back in Texas by taking the written test for his permit, and they pointed him to the ELDT website and said he has to complete the new training before getting his permit. All right, a couple of things here. So first off, anyone can get their permit, their CLP, without first taking the ELDT course. We've got some additional questions about the order of operations here, which we'll get to in a second, but suffice it to say, you can go get your CLP right now without ever taking an ELDT course. Okay, the second part, though, of Ruthless's comment, though, is talking about a scenario where a driver has previously held a CDL, but for one reason or another, that CDL was downgraded or lost prior to the implementation of the ELDT rule. Are those drivers now required to go through ELDT if they're looking to reinstate their CDL? The FMCSA actually has specific guidance out there on this topic that says no, those drivers are exempt from the ELDT requirement. Drivers who previously held a CDL of the same class or a higher class than what they're looking to now reinstate are exempt from the ELDT requirement altogether. Okay, Kirsten is asking about the process, the order of operations. Can someone explain the process for someone interested in getting a Class B? Do I sign up with a provider, study with them, then go to the DMV to take the knowledge test, and then start the behind-the-wheel training? So here's what you need to know. The ELDT rule doesn't set any specific order that these things have to be done, but there is a logical order that makes sense to follow, and here it is. Take the theory portion of the ELDT from a training provider that offers it. That will get you the basic knowledge. You'll need to then go to the DMV and pass the knowledge test that's required to get your CLP, your permit. Then once you have that permit, which you'll need in order to do the behind-the-wheel training, you can then go and take the behind-the-wheel training. And once you successfully complete that step, now you're eligible to go back to the DMV, take the skills test that's required to get your actual CDL. So that's the process I recommend you follow. All right, Hilton is asking if this, I assume he's talking about ELDT, goes for all states. In other words, are the requirements the same from state to state? That's an interesting question with a slightly complex answer. Generally, the answer is yes. No matter what state you happen to be licensed in, you will have to successfully pass this ELDT in order to get your CDL or the endorsements that we discussed. That said, the FMCSA did leave open the possibility for each state to impose more stringent ELDT requirements for drivers who are domiciled within their borders. The perfect example example is minimum hours requirements. Remember, I said earlier that the federal ELDT rule sets no minimum hours requirement for either the theory or behind the wheel portions of the training. However, some states do have their own minimum hours requirements, and those are enforceable. So it's important that in addition to understanding the general ELDT requirements that we've discussed here and in our other videos, you consult with your state DMV to understand whether they have any additional requirements. Those aren't common in my experience, but they do exist. Okay, so that's going to wrap up this video. Hopefully I've addressed the majority of the most common questions we've received on ELDT. If you have any other questions, be sure to drop them in the comments. Maybe we'll do a part 2 down the road. For even more in-depth information about the driver qualification process and other major aspects of the federal and state safety regulations, be sure to check out our innovative online courses for safety managers and drivers over at trucksafeacademy.com. Also, be sure to check out our detailed compliance articles on our website, trucksafe.com, and follow us on our various social media pages for the latest highway transportation news and analysis. Thanks for watching.